Well, come on in. Come on. Don't be scared. You're in the principal's office for another episode. And for the next 30 minutes, we are going to be getting to the heart of the issue. And the issue is always education. The issue is always topics in education and how they affect particularly the Black community. I'm glad you're here. Remember, our conversation will always be honest and solution focused. It is about you, your community, and their needs. I'm excited because guests get to come on the show, explain their views, their stances on the issues of the day, and I'm glad you're with us. So come on in, take a seat. I'm Michelle Pennix, or Principal Pennix to most, and today I'm extremely excited because we get to have none other than the one and only Dr. Marty Pollio, Superintendent of Jefferson County Public Schools. Dr. Pollio has given a life of service to JCPS, starting way back in 1997.
Correct.
As a teacher at Shawnee High School. He moved from being a teacher at Shawnee to Wagner High School,
Correct.
where he served as a teacher and assistant principal. Then he moved to J-Town High School, where he served as principal for close to 7 years.
8 years.
8 years. See, people want to be corrected and making sure. And then he moved on to Dawes right before he was named Superintendent of Jefferson County Public Schools. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Pollio to the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Principal Pennix. Excited to be here and join you in a good conversation around education. It's an important topic, as always, but especially right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we want to welcome you. And outside of superintendent, you have been a teacher, assistant principal, and principal. So which of those roles outside of superintendent did you find most challenging?
Well, I started as a basketball coach, and so my first job that brought me to Jefferson County Public Schools was to take the boys coaching basketball job at Shawnee.
So you were recruited?
Well, I was wanting to come to Louisville, and I got my certification. I was working as assistant coach at Eastern Kentucky University and decided I wanted to coach my own team, and I didn't want to be in any other place other than Louisville, and Shawnee was the job that was open. So I applied for it, and they hired me. I went in there and loved that, but you know, realized pretty quickly that coaching was not, I enjoyed it. I love my interaction with kids. I love teaching. I didn't like the games as much. I love practice. That's when I found out I fell in love with teaching and really felt like I had a calling in some other direction. There's no doubt superintendent is the most challenging, but you know this. The second most challenging and very close to that is being a principal. Because I was an athletic director, I was an assistant principal, I was a principal. And nothing compares to the weight on a principal's shoulders, because everything that happens in that school building feels the principal takes that home. So if it's a bad day, if scores aren't where you want them to be, if someone is upset with you, if a parent is very upset, most people, not everybody, and so I know teachers and assistant principals, that's tough jobs too, but principal owns that weight of the school being successful. And there is nothing like that challenge of feeling. Now, it can be exhilarating because when it's successful, a good principal will obviously give the credit to the faculty and staff, which they should. But it is a very challenging position to take on the success of an entire school that can have several hundred children in it.
Absolutely. We know that all too well. So let's talk about challenging and exhilarating. So let me start with COVID response right away. Tax increase debate right away, student assignment plan right away, and then transitioning from NTI last year to NTI 2.0. So I don't know if you'd use challenging or exhilarating, but out of those four areas, which do you think has caused you the most sleepless nights?
Well, I'll say this, that definitely the COVID-19, just because there is no playbook for that. As you know, getting your principal certification and me getting the same and then going on to take some more classes to be superintendent, you never had any class to tell you how do you deal with a pandemic.
Right.
And so there is no playbook on dealing with a pandemic. And the biggest challenge to it all is the fact that you are balancing out two extremely important factors, one being health and safety of kids and faculty and staff. So as a principal, when you go into a building, you have several hundred children there, but you also have, anywhere between 50 to 100 adults that are coming into that building, and you are responsible for their health and safety, but mostly the kids. But then you're also balancing out, their academic achievement and the supports they get. We all know, especially in an urban school, kids get so much of their support, not just learning at school, but so many other things that we provide, that JCPS provides, whether that be mental health, whether that be social services, whether it be food. And it's just difficult to replicate that in any other way when you're talking about virtual. And so we're balancing out these very two difficult things. And I think the hardest part of it is it's become political. In the spring, it was not political. It seemed like everyone agreed
was on
that
Team Andy.
the kids need to be safe. Let's keep. But as we transitioned into the summer, and there was some obviously political narrative around this must be Democrat or Republican, and you're holding kids out for political reasons, which has never entered my thought whatsoever. It has just become a real politically charged decision-making thing to do. And so, things like, so that I'll say that. Now, obviously we could get into student assignment and taxes, which are extremely hot button issues, both of them. And so those are ones, though, that, we get to make the decisions about how we're moving forward with it, where it feels like the COVID, there are no right decisions, if that makes sense. And unfortunately, every decision we make, there's some positives to it, but there's also some drawbacks to it. And some people are going to be happy with the decision, and others are not going to be happy with the decision. So it just makes for very difficult times when you're trying to navigate that thread, that needle between safety and student achievement.
Right. Well, one of the things you mentioned was politics, and so I think that's become just as racially charged as some of the other things that you were talking about. And this summer has been a great time of racial unrest and uncertainty in our community that's kind of continuing. Tell me, how has the murder of Breonna Taylor and or the city's reaction to it, particularly in the Black community, how has that impacted and influenced your decision as superintendent of 36,000 Black kids?
Yeah, so first of all, let me say this, that I think not enough people take into account the inequities when it comes to medical and doctor services in our Black community. And really, when we look at the amount of COVID cases that are out there, I mean, I think it's still to be seen, but there's a lot of evidence to show that it is impacting communities with Black students and our Latino students or families at higher rates. Not to mention that anytime there's an economic downturn, the impact that has on students as well. So I have to take that into account because JCPS is a minority school district now, and it recently eclipsed that. So when I get asked, how can the Catholic schools or the private schools be in session or Oldham County be in session, I don't think it's a fair comparison when we're looking at keeping our kids safe and healthy of a nearly 100,000 school district. But then on top of that, there was no doubt that the events in this nation, the racial unrest, and specifically here in JCPS, Breonna Taylor, has been another issue that has been very impactful to me personally. Knowing that Breonna Taylor was a student of JCPS at Western High School, and I can't even imagine how many thousands of young ladies that have been in one of my high schools in my 25 years in JCPS that are much like Breonna Taylor. I mean, it could have happened to any of them. And so, what I think it's done, first of all, on a positive part for us, it has forced us to push harder on racial equity, to have that conversation with students. Students want to talk about it. Elementary school students, middle school students, and high school students want to talk about it. And we get a lot of pushback from that, from the other side of the aisle, that we should not be talking about that in our schools. But when you have 36,000 Black students, and let me be clear, Michelle, on this. Obviously, I have a daughter who's 15. She's white. I want her talking about it in school. And so I don't think I know it's not just for the Black students. Right. We all need to be having conversations around this, and then we need to take ownership of some of the things that we do as a school, that we've done for many years as a school district, that is impacting achievement. And so, but I will tell you, the pushback has been great on it. So, one example, I sent out a letter the night that the decision came from the Attorney General about Breonna Taylor.
Right.
And I just said that I know a lot of people in the JCPS family are hurting and disappointed by the decision, which I think is factual. And that Breonna Taylor was a JCPS student, and that this and systemic racism is real, and that we need to push harder as a result of this. That's what the calling is for us. And the pushback I got from that was eye-opening for me, that people would disagree that vehemently with me and call me names that, I'm just supporting the kids in this school district. So,
Right.
But that comes with this, it comes with the job. And so we just know we've got to push harder to be successful and ensure that our kids, and this is why student assignment and the tax revenue increase is not as hard for me, because I know the vast majority of those dollars that we are asking for to increase revenue are earmarked to eliminate the achievement gap. And so I'm so passionate about this that I'm willing to take the heat and fight for this, because I know it's what our kids need.
Well, I appreciate your honesty around that topic, because that's a subject that a lot of people avoid. And I'll be honest with you in this segment of the show that, in preparation for this very important interview with one of the most important people in our city, if not our state, I had conversations with other people about questions. And one of the things they said to me is, Michelle, be careful that you don't come out as an angry black female. Don't come off that way. But you spoke to your passion, and I want you to know that's the same way that I feel. I think I would be less than a good interviewer if I didn't talk the passion that I'm hearing in the community. And I kind of want to focus that around my next question, which is just about, again, giving all due commendation to you and the school board for making this most important decision about NTI, because I can only imagine the type of pressure you felt, and the entire board, all of the teachers, the principals, central office staff, if you've mentioned, and all of their hard work. I also want to say, and I'm sure you'd agree, that we want to thank all of the moms, the dads, the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, even the community hub leaders that at the same time have, checked out Chromebooks, checked out hotspots, changed their schedules, rearranged, just to make sure that they give a valiant effort to it. So there is that piece of the population, though, especially in the black and the poor community in our city, that have not been participating at a high rate. And we know that those are the kids that, you've always worked with, you've dedicated your life to, me the same. What have you and your leadership determined as some of the deciding factors for the low participation with those students and families?
Yeah, so first of all, I have to say this. We have to acknowledge that NTI is not it's not a good replacement for in-person instruction.
Absolutely.
And so being educators, if it were, I'd be worried about the future of our profession if we could do it virtually. But the relationship piece, as you know, is the most difficult thing to replicate in a computer screen. And we can say that about adult meetings as well, that we miss. But kids need teachers, they need that relationship. So that is the hardest piece, and especially kids who may come from disadvantaged backgrounds, that they need that more than anyone else. And so that I knew from the very beginning, that's a part of the decision-making process, that we are going to have kids out there that need us in person. And so a part of that is doing everything we possibly can to lift up hubs in every way we can, so that we'll provide as many substitute teachers as we can provide. We're looking to provide teachers extra stipend after work. So if they want to come after hours, computers, laptops, everything. We opened up the Humana building downtown, which has some exceptional services in it. I was in there last week and had some families in there that had lost their home, and they were getting service while the kids were working NTI. Thank people like Dave Christopher and Amped for providing those services around technology. So we're doing that too. We're having the discussions about, are we able to bring certain kids in small groups into schools. And so we'll continue that. We have serious concerns still about safety and health. If we had kept the numbers where they were, I think we could have done this. But what's happened is it's exponentially grown in the past 3 weeks. So if we can get those numbers to drop, we can at least think about bringing in some kids into schools, small groups. But I really can't say enough how important it is that the community gets behind CDC guidelines, face masks, no large gatherings, so these numbers will go down. I mean, that is just absolutely critical for us. Now, I'll say this. When I've looked at the first 6 weeks participation rate, which we do daily participation rate, I've been pleased where we see in the participation rates. Now, there's varying levels of participation when you get on, so it's sometimes difficult, but just sheer participation, we're right at 90%, and our black student population is 88%. So it's really not too far off of that daily attendance rate that we usually have, about 3 points in each area. But we do know, and I'm willing to acknowledge, the participation rate may not be just because they're participating at one time during the day. We got to truly make sure they're engaged. So those are some of the things we're looking at right now.
Right, and this is where I just want to provide a little bit of pushback. I know one of the things that I'm hearing in the community and getting messages about as I become this Principal Pennix character is the participation of those students. I'm hearing from schools and families alike that a lot of students, a lot of families have just basically dropped out, that they have not put their energy and efforts for a lot of different reasons. One, as you commented, a lot of families are not home, but also the fact that when they are home, there's a generational divide that goes with the digital divide, that many families are saying, I don't know what this is, how to answer the questions, this platform, this program, and how to respond. And so as a result of that, many of the kids are still left out. And so one of the things I started at the beginning of the show talked about, we would be honest and solution focused. And I just want to delve a little bit deeper, if I can, around the hubs. And I say that because, largely right now, so I saw in an earlier special you did, 313-HELP, to find out about hubs that are available. So today I called 313-HELP. The first time I called, I was sent to another department. When I got to that department, I was told, I was sent to an answering machine with no name, so I didn't know who to call back. So I hung up, waited a few more minutes, I called back. This time I'm sent to the IT department, and the gentleman in the IT department says, I don't know what exactly you're talking about in relation to the hubs, call the schools. So I called 3 schools, said I'd like more information about hubs for children, and their response was, we don't have a good list. So I said, okay, well, let me try Evolve 502. So I go through Evolve 502, and I'm told we don't have a good list yet. One of the managers there is dealing with it, one of the directors. I call his cell phone. I don't get an answer. So as a parent, I'm thinking I've done all this work to find out. So I go again in search, and I'm given a list of 24 names off of a community website. And I start calling those, and everybody is full, or the prices are astronomical, $300 plus a week for a student to attend. So the question is, how can we commit as a community to help JCPS to work together collaboratively to establish more hubs in our community? I know that there are additional churches. I know that they have leadership in place that are committed to this idea, who want to be COVID safe, who want only a small handful of children to service. But what can we as a community do collaboratively at this point with JCPS and even Evolve 502 to make sure we have more places for our children?
I mean, I think that's a great question, and I think it's a community-wide problem, and I think that's what you're saying. First of all, I'll say this. We will correct that. I will make sure that we need to have that list on our website. Now, I will say it is challenging at times because hubs are kind of grassroots, and that's good in a way. So you have people, but we also have to make sure that we collect it. We decided early on that our convening partner would be Evolve 502, that would be the one that would do that because it's a collection of community folks that would vet it. So we weren't yet necessarily saying yes to one group and no to another group, trying to weigh that out. So there's no doubt we've got to get that fixed. We'll have that fixed immediately. So first of all, I'll say too, Humana is walk-in, so anyone can go down to First Street and those services. Humana is a walk-in and an extremely large building. So there is that opportunity to go down there, get food, get tech support, get tutoring help, get some ECE services are available down there. So free parking. So all of that is available there on First Street, the Humana waterfront building. But I'd really encourage, I mean, the more hubs we can have, the better, whether it's 4 kids or serving 40 kids. Now the organizations are going to have to ask themselves, can they provide services with social distancing? We can ensure that they get PPE, but I mean, that's something, and can they staff their programs? But I mean, I think the call is going out, and I will get with Evolve 502 to see if we can approve them much quicker. But any organization that would like to step up, the more kids we get into them, the better off we are.
Absolutely. And so I just ask you to, stay committed to that, and any way that I can assist in that. As I say, this is not a plug, but I've worked with a lot of those organizations that really want to be a part. And one of the things that we did early on was to make sure that they were able to accommodate students in an appropriate way and their families. So let's try to continue to make sure we work on that. All right, so one of the issues I wanted to bring up next, if I could, again, being honest and solution focused, is I bring up the commitment that we need to make around student assignment and the tax vote, because ultimately I don't think that, and as you've dedicated your life's work to it, it doesn't start after the tax vote, and it doesn't start after student assignment. I think that our community is looking at what is happening now. And so one of the things that we know is that, in early September on the JCPS board meeting, we were talking about COVID relief money. And at that time, the district had been given $36 million, $6 million off the top to private schools, spent several million more, and had at that time about $11 million surplus, or still money to be spent. There was a commitment made by the district treasurer that $6 million of that would go to supporting the advanced program platform for many of our students. So we're calculating, we're doing the work as a community, seeing, and when we talk about that, I guess my question is, how do we stop the insanity? Because one of the things I heard you say is, when you look back to the 1980s, the achievement gap was the same. And I dare say, when you go back even further, right? So standardized tests have done what they were designed to do, which actually, the superiority of the white race. And so if we can move away from that and really look at student assignment, if we can really look at, again, the hub conversation, we really want to know what is going to happen specifically around those issues that affect our community most. And just to zero in, we know that right now we have roughly 12 elementary schools that are majority Black, majority free and reduced lunch. And they're not mentioned as a part of the student assignment plan. And so we know that if a child is not reading by 3rd grade, and I heard you say this to me a million times as principal, that they're likely not to be caught up by the time that they leave school. We know that for a fact. So how can we commit? What does a student assignment plan do to bring more equity to those 12, 13 elementary schools that are way out of balance right now?
So phase 1 of it is the middle and high schools. Now, as you probably know, elementary school student assignment has changed multiple times. I believe the most recent being about 2014. That doesn't mean that I think it's right now a good student assignment plan. However, I have learned fairly quickly that one of the most difficult things to tackle is student assignment, because there is so much history and context around it. And I'll give an example. I've been reading From Brown to Meredith, a book written about Louisville's desegregation plan by a JCPS parent, actually, and a U of L professor. And I find in there, Michelle, some of the things that were implemented in 1956, like open enrollment, are still being used, and it was used as a tool to prevent segregation, and it's still something. Now, I think it's evolved over time, but it's still left here in this district. And so in 1984, I think was one of the most devastating decisions for West Louisville, which was everyone else in this entire city, the entire community, could stay close to their home and go to a school close to home, with the exception of students in West Louisville. And I think that is completely racially inequitable, number one. Now, I believe every parent in West Louisville should have the opportunity to leave the community if that's what they choose to do, but it should be the parents' choice to do that. But we also should have a great option for them to be close to home, without a doubt. The secondary resulting part of that is the district has not invested in West Louisville at all in this century. But the last time we built a middle or high school in this community was 1952, the new Central High School that's now end of life. So there is no doubt in my mind that we need to fix elementary school as well. That will be coming right after we've done middle and high, because we have done elementary. We are going to have to change. A big part of our plan is building and creating new magnets, especially in areas, underserved areas of town, that would attract diverse student populations. Unfortunately, most of our magnets right now are predominantly white students in many of them. And so we've got to change that, because I believe when a child raises and their family raises their hand and says, I want to go to that school for a particular reason, they're much likelier to be successful and feel a sense of belonging than if I just say you have to go to this school just because. Right. But a couple of challenges that you know that are ahead of us in this work. We are one of the most racially segregated cities in the United States. Mm-hmm. It makes it extremely difficult to find ways, to achieve diversity without forcing people to go to different schools. But unfortunately, that's only happened in West Louisville since 1984. And we are one of the most segregated when it comes to poverty and housing patterns in this district, in this right. community. And so those are huge challenges that make it very difficult to balance out free and reduced lunch and to achieve diversity within schools.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let me say this to that degree. We want to, again, as a community, be collaborative in our efforts to work with JCPS. As we move forward, we know that, the population of Black and brown students will just increase.
Correct.
And so there's going to be a time where those hard leadership decisions, similar to the ones you've had to make over the last 8 years, are going to be called for, because Black children and brown children, but particularly Black, have borne the weight in this community of diversity and making sure. And that's something that we've got to change. So one of my last questions, or next to last question, again, one of the things that we've looked at through some of the community boards and persons that I work with is actual numbers. So when we talk about the student assignment plan and even the tax increase, we talk about, and I'll just break it down to how the conversations I've been a part of have went. Roughly 36,000 Black students in JCPS. Out of that 36,000, we know we have roughly 2,000 that can be serviced at capacity with the new renovations to Shawnee. We know that students that score proficient and distinguished, the highest levels in JCPS, if we take them off the table, if we take off students at Grace James and the wonderful programs they have, Du Bois and the wonderful programs they have, when we take off, in other words, what the world might see as the cream of the crop with our students, and I'm talking particularly of Black students, we're probably left with close to 20 to 24,000 Black students in JCPS who aren't making the mark. And those are the ones that we're most concerned about. Mm-hmm. For 30% of our families, good, you continue doing what you're doing. But we know as a community we can't grow with a 70% novice apprentice proficiency rate or novice apprentice performance rate. So with that consideration made, what do you see? And I'll warn you in advance that I'm not a fan of the achievement gap.
I agree with that.
And I've heard you say the same thing. We think it's a gulf, and again, what comparisons are being made to say our children are behind. But with that consideration, tell me, what specifically do you think is going to make the difference for those 24,000 Black kids?
Yeah, so let me say a couple things. First of all, I agree with you. I prefer to call it the opportunity gap because I think that's what it is, and I'll give an example of that. For many, many years in JCPS, We have been identifying gifted and talented purely based on one assessment at the state level, which could be a very biased assessment. And we have not identified black students who should be gifted and talented. And so if 36% of our kids are black students, then 36% should be gifted and talented. Research supports that. And that's an opportunity gap that we've not been successful with in a district in a long time. But I want to be very clear about this, that I think, and I heard last week or 2 weeks ago, and I've said this, you may have heard me already say this several times, I've repeated it a lot. And I believe it is the most important thing that we haven't done an effective job with in this district. And it was from a professor, Dr. Ibram Kendi, who wrote the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I was listening to him speak, and they asked him, what's the number one thing that school districts and policymakers can do to push forward an anti-racist agenda? And his answer was very simple, but so powerful. He said, children that have the least amount of resources in their home must have the most amount of resources in their schools, and that must be exponential. And so what we have done, Michelle, yes, our high poverty schools, so I was principal at Doss, where I had 90%, nearly 90% were free and reduced. A third of the kids were English language learners or special education services eligible. And we got more things, but it wasn't systemic. It wasn't where we knew that it was exactly what we, so there might have been some add-ons, but it needs to be clear that we fund children based upon their need. So a student with English language learner, we better make sure we put that money directly behind that student, a special ed student, a student of poverty that needs additional supports, so that when you walk into a school like Mill Creek or I walk into Doss, we know we have kids with significant need, really, and it's not just about instruction and achievement. That's a part of it. But if we don't meet those needs, the fundamental needs, that kid's coming in with trauma, and he would walk in the door, and I could see as he got off the bus and walked in the door that something happened in his life the night before, and I'm not addressing that, and I'm putting him in the classroom and say, learn the periodic table in chemistry, we're fooling ourselves. And so those resources have to be there, and we know in high poverty schools many times the faculty and staff are stretched thin. So I believe that's number one, is ensuring that we have a clear system of how we fund schools. That's what we're working on. But second of all, I can't say enough. We've got to get our kids in school more. And I shouldn't say school, learning experiences more. Other cities have done this. We should have 10,000 students, and we couldn't this summer because of COVID, but in summer programming. And when we come out of COVID, it's not going to be an overnight fix. Each of the next 2 or 3 summers, we're going to have to identify kids, particularly kids that have fallen behind. I believe we need to target our black students and ensure that they have additional learning opportunities. I think hubs need to exist after COVID, in the evenings and on weekends, learning hubs for kids. So I think all of these, if we're going to attack this problem, those are the things we have to be very intentional about.
I'd agree. And one of the things that, again, I want to commend you for is your leadership to this point. And I also want to share that one of the things moving forward is, my final question before I ask your closing remarks is how you're going to be able to balance this. So this is a leadership question because, as you said, just a letter around the AG's report about Breonna Taylor caused great dissension in our community again from JCPS parents. So the question is, moving forward, to make this kind of commitment to the black community, to invest resources, to start hubs, to follow up, to make sure that you're accountable for that, how will you measure that against feedback from the other side of our community? And quite frankly, it's a black and white issue. It's a racial issue. How are you as a leader going to push back against that sentiment out there that says, wait a minute, why do they get and we don't?
Yeah. Well, I'll go back to what Dr. Cosby told me a few weeks back when I met with him, that if we want to be a great school district, all students have to achieve. And the foot can't say to the head, you're not a part of the body, or the ear can't say, and I know he was much more eloquent than I am in that.
Just Bible reading, just Bible reading.
But, you know, it was really impactful for me that, you know, here we have him telling me this: if we want to be a successful district, we can't ignore West Louisville. We've got to improve outcomes for kids. But more importantly, Michelle, I mean, you spent many years in this district. I've spent many years in this district. I've seen some great success stories that, you know, I just want to hug the kid and say, thank you for making it, and I'm so proud of you. Unfortunately, I've seen the other side of that way too much, way too many kids that I've poured my heart into that have not made it. And so it's personal for me. It is personal. It is not about me being, you know, any accolades. It's about me wanting to have kids succeeding, and we have too many kids that aren't succeeding. And so, yes, I've told people we've got to be willing to feel uncomfortable. We've got to be willing to get pushback on it. But in the end, we have to do what's right in this district, which is do everything to ensure every one of our students is successful. And we all have to admit that right now, and for the better part of 40, 50 years, whatever we want to say,
yes.
one particular subgroup of students has not been as successful as another, and we can't have that. So we've got to take every step to change that, and I don't believe this. It's not one program, it's not one initiative, it is comprehensive. How you hire, how you build facilities, how you provide instruction for students, how you provide wraparound. I mean, we've got to look at everything we do and continue to do that if we are going to be a leader in this type of work.
Absolutely. And so just like it's not one-on-one, as he mentioned, it's not one superintendent, it's not
That's
one
right.
teacher, it is one system. And if we are going to be effective for all kids in JCPS, we as a community need to come together to change the pieces of the system that haven't worked for the Black community. So with that being said, I am excited because I heard some things today that I plan to hold Marty, Dr. Pollio, accountable to. And I think will really make a difference in our community, especially the piece about extending the hubs, especially the piece about making sure resources follow the children, the quote that he shared with us. So in closing remarks, I'll give you the floor. Anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me here, and I will say this. The most important step that I've taken in my 25 years, the most impactful thing I could do was to ask the community to invest in our kids. And so, yes, we are asking for, and I'll say this, when I'd been making the case this was going to be the difference maker specifically for Black students and specifically for West Louisville, we went into COVID-19, into the economic downturn, and I said, well, we can't do that now. And I did some soul searching and it said, my job is to be superintendent and get the kids what they need. And so this is the most important thing that can happen in our district. We have not had the courage as a community to ask for additional revenue above the 4% since 1982 when it was unsuccessful. And every other community around us has done that. And we have a community next to us, Oldham County, who has 7 cents higher property real estate. Lexington has 8.5 cents higher. They've been willing to invest in their kids. Our community has not. It is time we change that, and it's the difference maker. So that's why I encourage everyone, go vote, first of all, that's critical. But second of all, say yes for JCPS, because I think it's the most important thing on the ballot.
So now I did my part. I informed my decision making by talking to the man in charge, the man with the plan. I too will be voting yes for JCPS, but he knows I'm holding him accountable. So does that mean you'll come back?
I will come back. I'm
happy
to
you heard
anytime.
it. And when he comes back, we're going to ask about that. You all, it has been my privilege and my honor to host the very important member of our community who holds our children in his hands. And so Dr. Pollio generously came and shared his time with us today. We want to thank him, and we want to thank you for tuning in here, same place, same time, always, Thursday, 6 o'clock for the principal's office. I'm your host, Michelle Pennix, and as always, to God be the glory.